Russell T Davies' 2021 5-part drama, It's a Sin, ended with this 5th episode, capping off a series about the AIDS epidemic in and beyond 1980s London. But this episode wasn't exactly always conceived of as the finale for the show. So, in this discussion, myself, Neo from Australia, as well as Ingiga from England and Tomtit from Australia, the three of us will discuss this 5th episode, the finale we got, as well as the unproduced episode 6 that would have extended the story of the show even further, as well as discussing other topics like the nature of shame and repression as treated within the episode, how the show functions both as testament and as drama, deep dives into the episode's many big speeches, and all sorts of other topics, as this really was quite a rich episode. So what did you two make of the finale that we got?
Well, it took quite a left turn, really. I thought it was kind of staggeringly good. It's sort of haunted me ever since I've seen it. I think haunting is like one of the words that comes to mind when I think of it. And it introduced me to probably one of my new favourite, although that word would imply that I like them, most interesting RTD characters in the form of his newest villainous with a name beginning with V. And it sort of balanced the horror with enough sort of sweetness and sort of poignant memories of like the people who were lost, obviously, in the events of this show. And yes, I was extremely impressed by it because, you know, and the ending is the most important part, really. And he nailed it, and it was probably my favourite episode of the bunch.
I felt that the whole central storyline with a certain V figure, another entry in RTD's lineup of iconic mother figures, was a very strong topic on which to conclude the series, and very psychologically compelling, a really interesting study of denial and just attempts to bend reality. It felt kind of epistemological in the same way that Ritchie denying HIV in the early episodes was. It was like, it was a really interesting, tragic story to follow, and the way in which it ended with the final gut punch was certainly probably the most shocking moment of the series. Yeah, no, it was an interesting finale.
I was also impressed with the finale. I think it certainly provides us a lot to talk about, particularly in the content of some of its big speeches, but the narrowing of scope really worked in its favour. I think Russell T Davies, RTDs, I think he's very strong when it comes to characterization, to writing nuanced and psychologically developed characters. And the way this 5th episode folded the series into really just shining a light on Ritchie, his parents, and Jill, I thought that worked tremendously well, certainly better than the other type of RTD finale, the stakes-raising and scope-widening finale that Doctor Who or Torchwood fans, or even just viewers of years and years might recognise. We'll definitely get into that twin aspect of how the finale narrowed its focus down to one household and family, but also perhaps spoke applicably to a huge amount of people and the AIDS epidemic in general. But without a doubt, I think the way this finale turned its sights primarily on the mindsets and psyches of the characters involved, I think that made for a really strong episode that played to RTD's strengths.
And I think there's something extremely elegant in the way this series has progressively sort of toppled various institutions. So it kind of started with like the healthcare institution in England, and then on to Parliament with Roscoe's subplot, and now we have the domestic family unit itself is being sort of abjured in a very vicious way by RTD.
So I say let's start off with discussing some of the episode's speeches, because this episode was really heavy on the speeches. It's tempting to start with the big Jill versus Valerie speech, since that really gets to the heart of a lot of what RTD was trying to say with the show, but there are other big speeches too. There's Roscoe's father's speech to Roscoe. There's that woman at the hospital's little speech about Ritchie to Valerie in that break room with Jill. And one that really interested me, Ritchie's speech about boys that he delivers to his mum in his bed when he's very close to the end. What did you guys think of that Ritchie's boys speech?
Yeah, because like he's got kind of two monologues, which the first one is sort of the very downbeat, dark one, where he reflects on how even when he knew he was infected, he still had these impulses where he felt he couldn't. He felt he was still going around spreading it. And then later on he has a more positive one when he's in his deathbed, basically, and he's reflecting on how much fun he had.
Boys die in London, and they say it's cancer or pneumonia. And they don't say what it really is.
But maybe we should think about tea.
But it's a lie. And I don't want that. Do you know why? I had so much fun. I had all those boys. I had hundreds of them.
Oh, Ritchie, don't talk like that.
And do you know what? I can remember every single one of them. Some boy's hair or his lips. The way he laughed at a joke. His bedroom. The stairs. His photographs. His face as he comes. Seeing him across a club 6 years later and thinking, oh, that's him. And he's with someone. And he looks happy. And I think, oh, that's nice. Because they were great. Some of them are bastards. But they were all great. That's what people will forget. That it was so much fun.
I think between those two things, which are sort of, I guess, two of the big bits for Ritchie in this episode, I guess it encapsulates how, well, an expression of how Ritchie's whole lifestyle was just a desire to feel connected, maybe, or feel, just to feel wanted, or to feel some sort of like connection with other people. I think something like that. Yeah, it was very poignant.
I think the Ritchie boys speech was like an absolutely beautiful bit of writing to my mind, because it's like the way he sort of bravely like alienates himself from his mother in his last moments. And because previously in the episode he's shown to sort of very much like capitulate to what his mother wants. It's like when she hugs him in the hospital for the first time, he's sobbing and he's saying, I wanted to tell you, but it's like he didn't want to tell her, and that's shown to us in very clear terms. But it's like, you know, when your mother is sort of demonstrating to you that you've sort of hurt her feelings, it's like to Ritchie, to the child, though he is 30 years old in this episode, but to Ritchie, it's like the ultimate sin. It's like, I will say anything to make my mother stop crying. But then finally at the end, he uses the vocabulary of his like independent life of going out and having sex to sort of just like boldly proclaim, you know, this is who I am. Not in a coming out way, just in a like, I am not the version of you that exists in your mind. I am my own self. And that includes being gay, obviously, in a huge capacity. But yeah, just that was a fantastic speech. I really loved it.
I think that final speech, what was so powerful about it is that it was a repudiation of that idea of shame. It's like, I guess, if we're talking about a sort of character arc that Ritchie maybe goes on like over the course of the series, just at the end there, the fact he was able to talk completely frankly to his mother about sex and pleasure and do things that she doesn't understand. And I think it was really, I think that's the point at which you can say, like, and he says that he doesn't want to be a secret, right? He doesn't want to be lied about and to be, you know, talked about like he doesn't want his illness to be covered up and shushed away. So I think that's kind of the closest he gets to like a real repudiation of this logic of shame that's maybe defined some of his storyline in the previous episodes. So it was a good ending, I guess, for him.
The prominence of the word boys in that speech called to mind, for me anyway, that the original title for the show was Boys, or The Boys.
I've just shot. We literally finished 3 weeks before they get closed down shooting a series called Boys. We can't think of a better title. It's not a very good title. Boys, as opposed to The Boys on Amazon, which is about AIDS in the 1980s. That brings the whole conversation crashing to a halt, doesn't it? We're trying to find better ways to sell this show and to pitch it.
And in fact, you can even see a little vestigial remnant of that in how at the bottom of the production company end card of the end credits, it says copyright The Boys series. Of course, there came to be another popular show called The Boys, which is why I presume the title was changed to a more evocative title anyway. But I wonder how the speech might have felt if the show's title hadn't changed and it had kind of a title drop quality to it. But yeah, in any case, I think that the regression element, Ritchie kind of peacefully submitting to his mother and the family unit, that's really interesting. And that speech we're talking about, how it really reclaims and points to the joy of the life Ritchie lived and all the sex he had as a big part of that. It's powerful stuff, and it's really in line with RTD's whole goal of wanting to celebrate lives lived rather than just pay testament to lives lost.
You mentioned that regression thing, and I found it fascinating that both his parents tried to sort of reduce him back to a child because that's the only version of him that they feel they understand. I thought particularly loathsome was Ritchie's dad, when the whole course of the show he's been this, when you're gonna make some money, when you're gonna get a job, when you're gonna do this, when you're gonna do that, and been basically brusque and callous and not really showing any human affection. And it's only when Ritchie's in his deathbed, literally ill, helpless, barely able to respond at all, that Clive is now, I'll read you Watership Down, you're my boy, I love you. And rather than feeling more sympathy for Clive through that, I found I was more disgusted by him than ever, because just the hypocrisy and the infantilism of it all, it was really quite sickening.
Well, the way Russell T Davies puts it, that I think is relevant to what you're saying about how the dad reacted, is we may well disagree with what RTD says here, but he says that some gay men, by living their lives so divorced from their family, they induce this kind of second closet onto themselves.
Ritchie is obviously he's keeping secrets at home, but then the whole HIV, we have to spoil this to some extent, then his whole HIV status becomes that. Roscoe leads a completely separate life from the rest of them. He never tells them anything that's going on until episode 4, and episode 4 is his liberation, where the whole Margaret Thatcher story sets him free. He literally runs down the street and takes off his jacket and becomes the Roscoe we want him to be, the man who can eventually forgive his father. So they're all kind of, by being brought up in the closet, they're all still closeted. They have an enormously gay life and they're gay as blazes in there, but actually every single one of them keeps secret. I set out to create a bunch of people in 1981. And I remember at the beginning thinking, you need a broad range of characters, and they all need to have different households, just so you can get more drama and more variety. That's the ABC, isn't it? Like, make them all different from each other. And I remember sitting here thinking, that's 3 or 4 sets of parents. So in the interest of variety and veracity, one of these characters should be out to his parents. And then I thought back to 1981. I thought back to all my friends and all the people I've known since of the same age. And I thought none of them were out to their parents, not at 18. In 1981, not one of them. And that was an eye-opener to look back with that amount of clarity and go, right, I don't. Obviously Roscoe's parents have discovered that he's gay, but they're certainly not happy about it. So that's, and then, because then you're telling the story, it all comes back to the virus. You're telling the story of a virus that operates in secret and relies on your secrecy and relies on your shame and relies on you to stay quiet and festers and broods and breeds in that silence and in that shame. So your characters are all in that situation. They might look as liberated as anything in that pink palace, but actually they're all carrying that burden on their heads.
And what Davies kind of seems to propose is that this separation kind of forestalls the possibility of parents, particularly fathers, from connecting with the sons in more productive ways. He's talking about this in the context of how we want Roscoe to eventually be a man who can forgive his father, apparently. We want this, and how that's blocked off by the immense break that Roscoe makes in so triumphantly leaving his family. And then characters carry the burden of lying in so cleanly separating their lives out. And this is why it's such a surreal moment when Clive and Valerie walk into the hospital ward, and it's like a crossover show, isn't it? It's like this complete meeting of the worlds. It feels so surprising and it feels so wrong to see these worlds collide. I don't know if I agree with what Davies is proposing here, because I kind of feel like it's almost baked on this impression that their families wouldn't reject them. Like, I feel like a lot of gay men leave their houses for a reason, and they keep their lives as gay men secret from their family for a reason. Like, if Clive learnt this about Ritchie when he was perfectly healthy, I don't see him reading Watership Down to him, like you're saying. But yeah, what do you think of this idea of Davies saying it's almost somewhat self-induced by the wall of separation gay men like Ritchie bring up between their families?
Well, I think the whole episode delves into that idea of bifurcating your life with, I guess, your more fulfilled, more free life, with your gay community, your chosen family, so to speak, and your life at home with families who don't really understand you. And I guess, I'm not sure if there's like a general theory of that we arrive at any point, but I suppose it's like we do see it how his parents don't really get him at all, and Valerie is reduced to nostalgic memories of when he'd be the little mouse and we'd sing that little song, and it's so incredibly pathetic because they obviously don't have any real connection to Ritchie at all, and that is obviously a result of him having to separate that, I guess, a part of himself like from them, and it's not really like his fault or whatever. It's like yeah, like I think you're right. Like it's something that we understand why it happened that way. Like it's not a sort of a judgment on him.
I guess there's no way we can cleanly kind of like cleave that knot and say, oh, they should have done this or they should have done that. I guess all it does is kind of explain why they do have to regress to a childhood structure of the family, because that's the only time before all this complication set in. You know, a 5-year-old Ritchie perhaps wouldn't have had the clarity of mind to be like, I can't come out to my parents because I am gay and they're not going to accept that, so I have to go live in London to live my life, blah, blah, blah. So it's just kind of absurd and really tragic to see them have to come down to this incredibly infantile structure just to kind of make sense of not only Ritchie having AIDS and dying, but Ritchie being gay at all. I just think it's so tragic that the family has to regress to try and make sense of that.
I felt like it was extremely realistic as well. Like, I think there's a certain trend sometimes among parents in a certain state of crisis whereby, like, if they feel like their child has been taken from them, then mentally they sort of preserve the child, like, at the age they were when they last had you know, a hold over them, basically. Whether that's, like, whether they've lost them through custody or in a situation like Ritchie, it's, like, that's a very real phenomenon that RTD captured, I think, very well.
I feel like with Valerie's reaction, I condemn it, to be clear. I condemn it very much. But I feel like Clive is kind of allowed freedom that she's not, perhaps, in a way. Like, he breaks down immediately. And he accepts the reality of it. You know, that there's no cure. And then she says, oh, that's just what those women and those doctors say. They worship the same rubbish. Clive immediately kind of gets to the reality of the situation, that his son is dying, and so he has an appropriate emotional response. He breaks down, he understands what's happening, he's very sad about it. But I feel like we've talked in earlier discussions about how, well, this might have been in spoiler zones, I don't know if you heard this gig, but how Valerie probably has to do a lot more emotional labour in that family, a lot more of the emotional work, since Clive is so stoic, and, you know, he's like, he doesn't even say, I want to have dinner with you. He says, oh, your mother wants to have dinner with you, so you've got to stay. So I kind of just feel that Valerie is so much of the onus of the emotional work put onto her that I don't approve of it, but I kind of understand that she is the more strange reaction to the course of this news, whereas Clive kind of has the allowance to react normally and appropriately. She's had so much more emotional work to process that it kind of makes sense to me, at least.
I think what we see with Valerie and Clive is that total reversal of the dynamic is their true selves come out, so to speak, because Valerie's been set up the whole show as the nice, sweet one.
Yeah.
And when she reveals, like, her true inner battle-hardened, like, you know, storming around, you know, control freak who's trying to, like, control the reality that's being upended around her, while Clive, one of the I swear the funniest bit in this episode, where Valerie says to Clive, you can have a bit of TV, I think. She just sends him away. It's so I find it hysterical. It's just like she just completely demolishes him. But Clive, I think as you know, we talk about Clive having like the normal reaction, but I think Clive, you know, he's not actually able to really deal with it. I think Clive becomes kind of the passive, maybe the more, like, I don't want to say the more pathetic one, because Valerie's reaction is pathetic in its own way too, but Clive becomes helpless in a way, whereas Valerie's doing everything she can to hold on and take control, which, as you say, she's been doing all along, just in a less obvious manner.
I think that it's in whatever way Clive gets to process it as grief, whereas Valerie isn't really processing it as that so much. She's processing it into something stranger and weirder, instead of that my son is dying.
I also get the sense, like, R2D doesn't show us very much of this in the episode, but I get the sense that Clive is just spending more time with Ritchie, whereas Valerie is wasting more time trying to block Jill and, like, just being a busybody around the Isle of Wight. So I guess there's that Clive has in his favour, maybe. But with the whole, like, go and have some TV line, Clive reminded me of, like, the other father in Coraline, where he's just a complete husk and he's kept by the evil mother. But it's like Valerie, she's sort of disgusted at Clive's weakness, and that's like one of the interesting parallels between Ritchie and his parents is that they're both very afraid of weakness. And Valerie, when she tells Clive to go have some TV, I interpreted that as like she is sort of instructing him to basically like play the masculine role. Like she's saying, you have to be the sort of dumb, insensitive father, go and be Homer Simpson in the lounge, and I am the kind sort of caring mother, and that is my role. She is like obsessed with those roles, and like she is an absolute battle axe in enforcing them. It was very interesting, and just the way she like bashes up on him as well. Like she absolutely deplores his weakness in this episode, which it's very like upsetting.
When Clive seems to actually acknowledge the reality that Richie's dying, she slaps him like, stop it. Like not just his weakness she's disgusted by, but the fact that he's kind of confronting the reality that she refuses to. Valerie seems to phrase everything in terms of like some sort of injustice has been done against her. She's always looking for people to blame. She blames Jill. You know, she there's all sorts of things that she's obsessed with, kind of the injustice of that she was supposedly denied knowledge of her son, which leads to that great scene where Sandra, the other mother in the hospital, just completely obliterates that, saying, actually no, it's your fault. It's got nothing to do with other people.
What the hell were you looking at?
I beg your pardon.
If you didn't know he was gay all those years, what did you see? When he was 11, when he was 15, 16. How old is he? 30? All 30 years and every little speck of him's bent as a 9-bob note since the day he was born. I'll ask you again, love. What were you looking at? You his mother. You're supposed to think about him day and night. So what the fuck were you doing?
I think it exemplifies RTD's skill at writing a character who only shows up for one scene, but who is instantly memorable, just for what they say and the way in which they say it. And it's so cathartic just hearing someone say that. We barely know her, but in that one's moment, like, we instantly love her because she's just great.
It really is amazing how quickly Valerie, in her first scene in this episode, she just goes through like different narratives of what's going on with Ritchie. Like first she thinks they're just being young and naive and overreacting. Then she criticizes Ritchie for like somehow dishonoring her friend who died of cancer and like saying that's his fault, like and then and then when she talks to Jill, and it's like she takes Jill's supportive nature and her own virtue, she takes that as like an attack on her. Like she has that attitude of like, oh, what, so you think I can't support Ritchie, when it's like clearly no, you can't. But it's a very detailed portrait of like a narcissist. I felt it's the way they make everything about them.
What it reminds me of is, in our discussion of the third episode, we talked about how very uncomfortable realities press entities, be they nations, because we were discussing it in the context of COVID-19, be they nations or be they individuals, it presses them into like just clutching at any narrative they can that can make some sort of sense that reasserts their current status and things without, having to rewrite everything according to the actual new reality. And so that's why I think we see it as clutching and listlessly going through all these different narratives, because it's not really about the truth of any of those narratives, really, is it? It's just about trying to have to assure she is okay. It's not her fault. Other people are bad because X has happened. There's no self-assessment really in that sense.
I loved the way the cinematography in the hospital scene followed Valerie around as she's kind of stormed up and down the corridors and kind of stopped in a room and then came back. It was kind of emphasising her as like the one still point, as this reality is like, swirling around her, trying to maintain control and kind of keep a grip on that. You had that long take of her walking up and down the corridor and just being the focus of everything as she, rants at people and has a go at the poor lady behind the reception. It's a really fantastic immersion in her psyche.
There's a bit where you just see her you just see the back of her head as she's walking along, and she like moves her head around like a meerkat, like she's just looking for something. She's trying to look aloof or something. But yeah, I agree. There's like a whole story that she tells just by the way she moves around the hospital. It's quite amazing.
We're talking about big speeches, so of course there's the Valerie and Jill speech about shame, and there's the Ritchie speech about all the boys that we've talked about. A speech that really interests me, which is also about boys, is Valerie's in this hospital scene we're talking about, where she tells Jill...
See, what you don't understand is this. Boys are terrible, Jill. They will do anything. They are rowdy. They just are. So when someone like Gay comes along, it's just another chance to unload. And someone like Ritchie, he's young and he's pretty, and there'll be lots of those men paying him attention, and so he goes rotting once in a while. But that doesn't make him homosexual. It's a little bit of fun. But then you grow up.
I suppose, I don't know, maybe some boys are like that. But then there's Ritchie, who's gay. Absolutely, definitely gay. He's beautifully gay. I'm sorry, but look at him. I mean, he's an actor. He sings songs from the musicals. He's never had a girlfriend.
And now he's got a gay disease.
What did you guys think of that speech?
Well, interesting, she was immediately assigning blame to invisible, nameless other men, like older men, presumably, who were, like, preying upon the Ritchie. But also, it's a really fascinating way of trying to reconcile this idea of, this kind of very heteromasculine idea of, boys will be boys, with it, with gay activity. It's quite fascinating just how warped and nonsensical it is.
The word use of rutting just really struck me. That it's such a
farmyard.
Yeah, it's just evocative, I guess.
Yeah, I think it makes it seem sort of quite like mindless, sort of animalistic, and sort of I think it maybe defangs the idea of like gay people's actually doing things with each other because they want to or because they enjoy it. You know,
it reminds me of the kind of language that like the Westboro Baptist Church or just like these religious extremists will use about like, fornication and rutting, and like I think it's also like Valerie's disdain for just youth. Like she thinks all young people are stupid. And the crazy thing about that is that like the characters in this episode aren't even young anymore. They're all like, Ritchie is 30. I assume the others are approaching their 30s. They don't look it, which is odd, but yeah, strange.
I think it also just ties into that general approach to masculinity Valerie has, how she kind of infantilizes Clive in a way. It's just this idea that gay men, or at least Ritchie, they aren't really gay. They just can't help themselves. Men just can't help themselves. They're randy. That's just what they are. It's just this kind of abdication to responsibility to kind of just explain men's like excesses. I think you can tell, and we'll come to this a bit later, she might have had some unpleasant experiences in her life, or at least some unpleasant lessons from her elders to get her to view people in this way. Perhaps rationalised through her own experiences.
Yeah, definitely. When she says, like, boys are terrible, she's had... that has to have come from, like, lived experience. She's had to deal with all sorts of things.
The 6th episode would have touched more on that, but we'll get to that later. And also, she phrased it now as, after Jill kind of pushed back and explained, Ritchie's beautifully gay. He's, he's an actor, he's never had a girlfriend. After she kind of makes the reality of that so clear, Valerie's, like, chilling response to that, and now he's got a gay disease. Awful. Just awful.
Immediately after that, when Valerie starts like blaming Jill and sort of saying that Jill was complicit in hiding Ritchie's homosexuality by being with him, and there's one note in there where she says to Jill, like, where the hell is your boyfriend? And like that kind of, I think it links into something we were talking about earlier on in the series, maybe in one of the early episodes, where we were asking the question of, is
episode 2's,
is Jill like in love with Ritchie or whatever, is that sort of thing, or is Jill perhaps doing the whole caring for her gay friends thing out of some sort of like personal narcissistic self-sainthood thing? And I think putting that in the mouth of Valerie kind of removes the credence from it, because we know Valerie is like talking nonsense, trying to find blame. So it was kind of interesting to see that anti-Jill narrative put in Valerie's mouth, I thought.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I can see where you're coming from. However, the cast had a slightly different take. This is from the behind the scenes for this episode, the finale.
So I feel like Ritchie's a bit of a dick, to be honest, because I know I love him too, but he's like, he just doesn't really, he can't see it. He's too busy with his own thing to really see what's going on in front of him. His best friend might be feeling some way, he doesn't really see it.
And there was a little bit in the first few episodes where they go out and Ritchie would just ditch Jill.
Yeah.
And Jill was just like, she'd be like, okay, to be happy.
So it's interesting. I don't think it's just Valerie that felt there was something there. I come back to what we basically settled at the episode 2 discussion, in that I don't think it is going to fit naturally enough into, oh, Jill is in love with Ritchie and she wishes they could be together. I don't think it's as pat as that, but I definitely think there's something kind of there.
I was just going to say, yeah, it does feel reductive to reduce Jill into being, simping for Ritchie, basically, being hopelessly in love with the guy who won't love her back. It's like it's like an annoying cliche for a female character.
I mean, even if it wasn't as simple as that, Ritchie's still pretty. He takes her for granted. Yeah, certainly. And I mean, where's he going to get this from? Look at his parents. That's kind of the setup of how the gender roles work in that marriage. But he does take her for granted, and I think even if you want to take the yearning element out of that. I mean, all these boys have taken Jill for granted. I think back to all the stuff.
She keeps secrets as well. When Gloria asks her not to tell anyone, she doesn't tell anyone. I couldn't quite tell you myself. Does she ever tell everyone about Gloria? I don't know. That's part of her problem. Is when she's put upon, she's very put upon, and good Lord, if you want gay men to put upon a woman, they will do it. I think the series is quite critical of them in that sense. It's like, it's funny. I know you show a series in which a lot of gay men rely upon a woman as though it's a good thing, and it's not. I'm quite critical. I'm very critical of this bunch of people, even though I love them. But that's the way to write well. I don't think the demands that Gloria makes on her are good at all, and Ritchie's reliance. It's like, there she's having to fight off the parents and suggest they go to the parents, and he fends that off. She carries all the hard work. It's like, it's tough. Some tough decisions.
Yeah, Jill puts up with a lot, but also she intentionally puts herself in these positions where she has men put upon her things to do. So yeah, there's a lot of psychological stuff at play. I'm being blamed for not knowing my son when you conspired and moved heaven and earth to lie to me. I think that's a really interesting intersection with what we're talking about, with whatever Jill is doing with Ritchie and the lengths she goes to him, and also that kind of bifurcation of the Ritchie's household life with Ritchie's family.
I'm being blamed for not knowing my son when you conspired and moved heaven and earth to lie to me.
I wasn't lying.
You sat there next to him in my house, time after time after time, with this great big elaborate lie.
I told you. I said every time. I told you I wasn't his girlfriend.
And then you sat there simpering, laughing at every word he said. And you think I'm the one who's deceived. Never mind about him having a boyfriend. Where the bloody hell is yours?
I was doing what Ritchie wanted.
This is what you are. A chorus girl, running round after these boys with no life of your own.
Okay, but I don't really think this is about me.
But I think this is absolutely about you. Because you stood in the way. You stood in the way. If I couldn't see him, it's because you stood in the way. You monstrous big bitch.
Do you think it was absurd, the lengths? Like, this episode started with kind of the lengths Ritchie and Jill were going to hide his illnesses from his family. Do you think it was absurd to do that, or do you think it made sense to do that? What do you think the end game exactly was there?
I feel like it seemed like certainly Jill was continually hoping that Ritchie would just, his condition would maybe improve at some point, and that I don't know, I feel like with Ritchie there probably wasn't any sort of plan. He was just like, oh, fuck it, let's just keep being in denial indefinitely, and we don't know where this will end up. And although secondly, the way in which, when his parents did eventually appear, the way in which he just sort of gave in and just told them the truth, suggests that maybe to some level he might have prepared himself for that internally. Like, one day they were going to find out something was up.
RTD, I think it's very sort of salient to note that RTD is on record as a procrastinator, and I think the act of procrastinating sort of requires a certain degree of magical thinking. It's like, oh, tomorrow I will be completely energized and I will want to do this. Oh, the day after that I'll be even more energized, so I'll put it off then. I think RTD is basically working off the same psychology here, except obviously projected onto a much more extreme situation. Yeah.
I love that. I never would have thought of that. That's such an interesting read. Yeah.
Although, having said that about that first scene with Ritchie and Jill, I think there's a difference between hiding someone's homosexuality from their parents and hiding that someone's got a deadly illness from their parents. I think there's a nuance there, isn't there? You can sort of like I think I don't want to say there's less blame involved, because there's various reasons which you might do either one of those things, but I feel like maybe it's more like, actually I'm not sure which is actually better or worse. Like it's odd, isn't it? I guess because the two things are so wrapped up in each other.
Well, I think I have so much respect for Ritchie for, as he said at the ending of episode 4, for wanting to live. For it didn't really make sense because even with the knowledge they had then, it was fatal. But Ritchie wasn't going to take that, so he was going to do all these things and take all these, like he was going to get chemotherapy, even though that seemed mad to do in his condition. He was really fighting AIDS with all he's got. I wonder if how some people that are very ill tend to do better and sometimes even recover if they're not totally aware of how ill they are. I feel like his kind of logic in persevering with those painful, ways to try and keep fighting the AIDS, if he accepted the reality, if he acted more like his father than his mother of how bad what he was afflicted with was, I feel like maybe that would have all collapsed and he wouldn't have done those things. So I feel like there's a kind of intelligence to the procrastination there, to putting it off, because if not for that, how could he have kept going with, taking chemotherapy and things like that?
Yeah, certainly. The idea of like putting off, like sort of blowing everything up and confessing to his parents and stuff, like I think that's a desire to keep sustaining his life, rather than sort of give in and accept, the fate or whatever.
Well, talking of parental reactions, we can't forget Roscoe and his father. I found this such a fascinating part of the episode. So when we meet Roscoe's father in the first episode, he's, almost this kind of cliche of a very religious man with a very kind of traditional structure of the family, and he really wants to expunge the homosexuality from his son, and he's looking to send his son back to somewhere that sounded pretty grim to that end. It was all sounding pretty dire. Roscoe had his big triumphant escape. When we saw the father in later episodes, he still seemed very stuck to these traditional structures that we wouldn't want Roscoe to return to. We hear about how the father is so cut up over his daughter got pregnant and his son is gay and off living in London with who knows who, but we weren't kind of endeared to sympathy with the father because up until now we just thought, well, he's a super religious nut job. It's a good thing Roscoe isn't in his life. Imagine how he'd be talked to, imagine how he'd be treated. But the thing is, Russell T Davies, who's very much an atheist himself, he's never really content to just treat religion, to tar it with the same brush. We saw this in Doctor Who, where sometimes there were very atheist episodes, if you wanted to put it that way, and sometimes there were episodes that gave religion a very fair go, you could say. And so what I find interesting here is how we kind of get the fundamental compassion which comprises some people's Christianity is kind of characterized in Roscoe's father, that he finds it so abhorrent how people with AIDS are being treated. He can't believe people are being locked away with no medicine. He can't believe people being treated like animals. He can't believe people calling sick patients devils, letting them die, men and women and children. And that's kind of shook him into a reassessment of things. And then he talks about, forgiveness is the Christian virtue. It's the hardest challenge the Lord gives us to forgive. Of course, he means his son forgiving him for his heinous treatment of Roscoe rather than the other way around.
I thought you'd gone. They said you'd gone back to Nigeria.
I was in the West. And I saw terrible things.
Oh, my heart bleeds.
I went into hospitals and I saw people locked away with no medicines. These doors were locked and the people behind them were like animals. I said, "Who are they?" And they said, "They are the devils. We let them die, people with that disease. But men and women, so many women and children too. It is so difficult, Roscoe. It is the hardest challenge the Lord gives us. To forgive."
I don't want your forgiveness.
No. I mean, can you forgive me?
I found that a really interesting way to do things, but what did you guys think of Roscoe and his dad?
I'm like a bit naturally skeptical of sort of narratives about forgiving your family member who's done something wrong, just because I'm so like inured to those sort of bougie family value plots, you know, Idiot's Lantern, Doctor Who. And I guess, like, the thing is, Russell T Davies has given us a very good justification for Roscoe to forgive his father, which is that he has had a change of heart. But I almost felt like, was it sort of too easy for that to have happened? Like, he just comes in and sort of very quickly recounts this experience he's had, and I sort of thought, doesn't that kind of negate the drama a little bit? And if anything, the drama is for Roscoe. Like, is he going to sort of just sort of be I'm in it for myself sort of character, which we saw with him sort of ingratiating into Stephen Fry's world, or is he going to sort of extend an olive branch to the wider world? But I kind of felt like that arc had already resolved in episode 4. So I don't know. I was a bit lukewarm on it. But, I mean, it didn't take up much time in the episode, and I could be swayed by whatever your take is going to be. So go on.
I think the issue with forgiveness is that forgiveness it's a trait that's really pushed.
Yes.
In the countries we live in, certainly. And I think the reason for that, forgiveness is a Christian virtue, of course. It's a huge part of religion. Forgiveness is a huge part of all sorts of structures and systems in Western society. And the thing is, the nature of forgiveness is to support and uphold existing structures, isn't it? I forgive you. Things don't have to change because I've forgiven you. It's okay, Dad. I forgive you. So everything can stay the same because we've moved past whatever you did. I've forgiven you. And that's why I think, like, we're gesturing at that Doctor Who episode by Mark Gatiss, The Idiot's Lantern, where there's a frankly really bad father acting really badly. And then at the end, the superheroic doctor figure tells the son that's been a victim of this bad behavior, he's your dad, so you've got to go, shake hands with him and be nice to him again. The issue whenever forgiveness is getting pushed in popular media like this is that, of course, there are going to be some situations, like Roscoe's father and Roscoe here, where the perpetrator of whatever bad things in the family has very much owned up to him, and he's talking. Roscoe's father, I certainly don't get any duplicity from him at all. I think he's truly been shook by the terrible treatment he's seen of people with AIDS, and he's being honest in what he's saying. And so it's good for him and Roscoe, if they're happy with it, to patch up their relationship. Are most people in the audience getting this message of forgive your father going to be in comparable situations? I don't think so. I think most people getting pushed to forgive in domestic issues are people that forgiveness would certainly be the peaceful solution. I don't know if it would be the most just solution for them. Do you know what I'm saying?
I guess, see, more than the whole dilemma of whether Roscoe should forgive his father or whatever, I kind of lean towards Tom Titt's position and feeling like it wasn't that big of a drama for Roscoe. Like, when he goes back to his family at the end, it felt like, okay, yeah, sure, Roscoe, I can see Roscoe doing that. It didn't feel like a seismic thing, because Roscoe was like, it didn't feel like it was really linked to, like, the Roscoe's journey over the course of the series. It was very much, I think, in the sense of inertness that we feel. Like, Roscoe's dad has had a huge change of heart, but Roscoe's just kind of, he's presented with it, and then it's just like, will he be like, okay, and then of course at the end he is like, okay, he goes back to his dad, and it's like, okay, well, it's nice that happened, but it doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of story to it. I feel like we don't get much of an exploration of Roscoe through that prism. I think especially because, like, the first time we meet Roscoe, he's so like unashamed, he's so like, he just storms in there, he confronts his family utterly with who he is. So when he comes back to his family again at the end, kind of a bit more normal, it's like, well, okay, it just feels like it doesn't feel like a huge step for him, really. I don't know.
I guess there is the bit at the start of this episode where he, like, smashes the neighbor's window in Charity.
Oh, yes.
I guess it's kind of establishing, like, is Roscoe going to be just scorched earth for the rest of his life? But the thing is, I kind of enjoy seeing Roscoe behave like that. Like, he's so shrewd, and he's such, like, a survivalist. I kind of derive pleasure from that. But to be honest, my feeling about the whole Roscoe plot is that it feels a little bit to me like it was added more than anything else as a counterpoint to Ritchie and Valerie, which is like, that's obviously a very pessimistic parent-child story. I kind of felt like RTD felt he needed a lighter point to say that, yes, people can change. And so in that sense, the Roscoe and his father plot felt a bit like reverse engineered. And I don't think that's the best way to generate drama. But, the thing is, it didn't take that much screen time. And, like, I don't object to the idea of forgiving someone in totality. It just was a little bit weak to me.
I'm not contesting the idea that the drama may have been inert, but I would contest the idea maybe floating around now that Roscoe was, like, cowing himself down or conforming himself at all to go back to his family. Because I think what his father was saying was very much showing it's the other way around. It's his family that's come up to meet him, rather than him conforming down to meet with his family. It's literally the family saying, you were right, I was wrong. So I think there's a strength to some kind of catharsis in the series having some recognition that, you know, it's the world that's being insane around these gay characters rather than them being wrong at all. I see what you mean with the dramatic inertia, certainly.
Roscoe, I agree with you, Neo, on that scene in the sense that Roscoe does very much come across as, like, more mature than his father in that scene, which I think is also true of Ritchie and his parents. Like, I think Ritchie, his life has been so accelerated and compressed into this short amount of time. He has become wiser than his parents, I think. But I guess if there's a problem, it's that I kind of already felt that way about Roscoe almost from the very beginning. And I feel like I'm not really learning much new about him.
Yeah. Well, the episode had me thinking a lot about forgiveness since it runs through a lot of the stories here. And I think, like I was saying earlier, I think forgiveness inherently tends to support the status quo because forgiveness, by nature, it's condoning the way something is proceeded. It's kind of peacemaking in that way. So to walk things back a bit, I get the idea of how, even if we mightn't see the Roscoe scene this way, the idea of Roscoe kind of cowing down to his family, in a sense being unpalatable. So is it submission? Is it submitting to forgive someone? One of my favourite authors, living authors at any rate, is Cormac McCarthy, and in one of his books there's a passage that reads, "He knew that our enemies by contrast seem always with us. The greater our hatred, the more persistent the memory of them, so that a truly terrible enemy becomes deathless. So that the man who has done you great injury or injustice makes himself a guest in your house forever. Perhaps only forgiveness can dislodge him." And so there you have what I think is relevant. You have the idea of forgiveness on a kind of self-interested ground. The idea of forgiving someone not out of guilt or societal pressure or just for keeping the peace in a community or in a relationship, but forgiving to move on from your issues with someone, forgiving to get them out of your head, to get that pain out of your head that they might be bringing into there, the memory of them or what they've done. Obviously, this can't apply to all situations. There's plenty of parental mistreatment, a lot more actively and consistently ruinous than Roscoe's, for example. But it is a more complicated idea of forgiveness than either forgiveness as submission to keep the peace or the alternative, holding a principled grudge forevermore. I'd like to think that when RTD deals with forgiveness, maybe it's more to do with compassion for the person that's been wronged, for wanting them to be able to live a happier life, rather than compassion for those that did the wronging. I'm not sure if that aligns with what he's saying, but I find it a more comfortable spin than children forgiving the wrongs of their parents just out of some vague ideal of goodness. However, I do find myself drawn to lack of forgiveness, withholding forgiveness, as a sort of principled and cathartic assertion of reality, the reality that some wrong has been done. I think that there are some lines in the sand that are worth drawing and are worth the potential mental anguish that comes with holding them over the idea of forgiveness, even if it's just for one's own peace of mind. So I understand where Tom is coming from when he's talking about enjoying seeing Roscoe in that more defiant fashion. I guess there's an element, I just find it cathartic to see a very apocalypse-preaching kind of man like Roscoe's father actually recognize a very tangible and real, great big injustice and sin and apocalypse-level pain and death going on in the world. For him to kind of live up to his professed values, recognize how poorly some people are being treated, recognize how dehumanized they've been, how much they're suffering, how awful that is. So that's all cathartic. Although I wonder if I'm getting a kind of wish fulfillment out of how that character's come to that recognition at that point that maybe is less morally complicated than other parts of the finale, as you guys point out. Yeah.
I guess I'm very much in favor of the idea that, like, not everything in this show is doom and gloom, and there has to be, like, some glimmer of hope. Like, hope is not always a poisonous thing. I just wish it was a bit more complex, I suppose.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, for sure.
On the topic of characters who don't get much screen time, like, what do you guys think about Ash and his role, both in this episode and I guess the series overall? Like, because he feels like he's barely in this episode, truth be told.
Yeah, very small part. The actor seemed pretty game for whatever he got. But yeah, it was, I guess part of it was the idea that, what could have been, because we have this kind of null relationship with Ritchie where he calls himself Ritchie's boyfriend, which he's like, are you? Maybe if things had turned out differently. But I kind of feel like Ash's whole place in the series kind of feels like this. It's like the whole character never really got a big serving, and I guess that's kind of the point of the last episode is, what could have been? if him and Ritchie had a big story together. But yeah, I don't know what I really felt about that. What did you guys think?
I guess he's kind of like he's the love interest, really. I mean, yeah. I don't think it's a coincidence that what's the actor's name? Nathaniel Curtis?
Yep, that's his name.
But I don't think it's a coincidence that he's like the most sort of conventionally handsome member of the cast, perhaps. I mean, I heard the host of the after show comment on that, so...
He's the tallest, certainly.
He's massive. Like, he absolutely dwarfs Keely Hawes. It's kind of hilarious. And the fact that, like, he's so much taller than Valerie and he, like, cowers from her in the doorway, that was another example of fantastic physical staging in that scene. But anyway, Ash, yeah. He was definitely a smaller part in the series, but... I really liked the whole motif of like leaving it too late to declare the love for each other, because I feel like that mirrors Valerie leaving it too late to tell Jill that Ritchie is dead. I like the sort of recurrence of traits across the generations. But yeah, he wasn't like the most impactful character in the show by any means, but I thought he was effective for the role that he was created to play.
Do we want to talk about the huge Jill-Valerie confrontation now?
Yeah, I think we might as well move on to that.
Well, first of all, I'll play some audio of the actual thing. But before I do, I want to make it clear that this isn't just like a big constructed character speech. A lot of this is stuff the showrunner Russell T Davies does actually believe, because he says he has a theory that homophobic households need to have something else wrong with them.
Because I have a theory that I have a belief that a homophobic household has got something else wrong with it. If you turn around and hate your son, where's that come from? What else is wrong with you? There's something profoundly wrong in that household.
But there has to be something else explaining that kind of lapse in his words. And so we get the big speech.
Were you with him yesterday? Were you there at the end?
Oh, I'd gone downstairs.
He was on his own.
Yes.
There was no one with him.
That's not my fault.
Actually, it is your fault, Mrs. Tozer. All of this is your fault.
Well, thank you very much. That's ridiculous.
But it is. Right from the start. Because I don't know what happened to you to make that house so loveless. But that's why Ritchie grew up so ashamed of himself.
I think we're finished.
And then he killed people.
And what is that supposed to mean?
He was ashamed. And he kept on being ashamed. He kept shame going by having sex with men and infecting them and then running away. Because that's what shame does, Valerie. It makes him think he deserves it. The wards are full of men who think they deserve it. They are dying. And a little bit of them thinks, yes, this is right. I brought this on myself, it's my fault. Because the sex that I love is killing me. I mean, it's astonishing. The perfect virus came along to prove you right. So that's what happened. In your house, he died because of you. They all die because of you.
So what do we think of Russell T Davies' personal theories that Jill kind of expresses there, and the confrontation between Jill and Valerie in general?
RTD sure does love his polemics about individual responsibility, doesn't he?
Yes.
I think trying to arrive at a general theory of, self-destructive behaviour in, say, like the gay community, for example, I think it's an inherently difficult task, because that's a huge subset of people that you're trying to basically put into to lump together, I suppose, and to go further still and sort of stop with that theory at, okay, loveless straight households, I guess. I feel like RTD wants to criticise society, right? Because it's the institution of, this whole nuclear family idea that is kind of coming under the lasers here, I suppose. But I guess you can't really attack society without actually taking a more holistic view. And I think that when you sort of stop at, like, this is all because of you, this is all because, you didn't love each other enough or whatever. I think it runs the risk of being reductive, I think, is probably the thing. I think it's very difficult to really encapsulate so many different people's experiences with a theory like that just sort of puts it all down to shame or whatever. But at the same time, there is something very true in the whole thing, which is that I think that obviously, yeah, like being I guess growing up in an environment there which does not have like regularly sort of reinforcing of like love and being able to express yourself, it does, like, it fucks you up. It happens.
I guess, like, when Jill says to Valerie that it's her fault, I didn't necessarily interpret it as like that specific character, you know? I mean, I'm sure you guys understand this, but like, you know, she's kind of a symbol of like a type of person, and I think B, the idea of like the nuclear family in general. So I mean, like, for me, maybe this is just my personal taste. For me, it was radical enough. I mean, I guess you could accuse me of like having scraps, but just like the idea that RTD is maybe suggesting that the family should be organized in a different way. I found that it's not something that I expected the show to do. So in that sense, I was quite pleased with that strand of the story. I also felt that a little bit that Valerie in that scene on the beach, like, I got a little bit of a like Thatcher by proxy vibe. Like Jill could almost be addressing Thatcherism in the sense that Valerie is like, she embodies austerity of the domestic kind. Or maybe that's completely delusional and like a really hackneyed analogy. But like when the main sort of like animus of the series is this sort of very stony female figure during a time of Thatcherism, it just came to my mind. But yeah, I like the speech for those qualities that I have mentioned.
The speech, to me, it feels very theatrical in that it's kind of assigning a singular, very identifiable fatal flaw that explains, you know, the psychological motivations of so many people. So in a sense, it's very pat and reductive in that way. Like, I don't think super spreaders and homophobic households, and I don't think all these things can be explained by what the speech is suggesting, but I think dramatically it makes a lot of sense. Russell's talked about how one of his big drives to make this show was to write a super spreader from a sympathetic point of view. Since they're so often portrayed villainously, he wanted to inhabit the mindset of one and really explore that, you know, on their terms. And that, you know, HIV positive men who infected others, he says, very often those people have been for decades portrayed as villains and monsters, criminals, and maybe that's true, but they're also very ordinary boys being as stupid and horny as any boy ever is, and scared and in denial. This interview is funny because this came out weeks and weeks ago, so before the show had actually aired, and he says to the interviewer from the Times, "I don't want to spoil it, but this is more important than spoilers. It was very important to me that Ritchie is someone who is HIV positive, who knows he's probably HIV positive, but carries on sleeping with men." So I think dramatically all the ideas about shame and everything in that speech make sense to me. Of course, trying to apply this to the endless complexities of the real world, it's going to end up with issues, but it's a drama.
Yeah. I think that like a very small percentage, perhaps zero, of fiction actually manages to address like the underlying problems of our world. Some dramatists embarrass themselves to a greater degree in trying than others. RTD mostly acquits himself fairly well, I think. And generally, I like the focus on sort of self-denial being a sort of false ideal, and like our sort of shunning of pleasure is leading us down some dark places. And while I wouldn't say that like that's a one-size-fits-all cause for every problem that has ever existed sociologically, I just like that it got a bit of, you know, RTD got his mitts into it a little bit.
See, from a dramatic perspective, as we've basically talked about how this speech is basically RTD getting on his 60-second soapbox and putting his own ideas in Jill's mouth at that point. And I think from a dramatic perspective, I felt maybe that I wanted more of Jill in that bit, because at that moment she's just found out that not only has her friend died, but she's been denied a chance to even say goodbye to him because his mother is so vindictive. Yeah, she's been stonewalling this for so long because of just all these it's insanely just, I don't want to say evil, but just really just absolutely horrific behaviour. So I felt like at that point it's kind of like the way in which we segue into this big ideas focused speech, trying to sort of pin the blame on like the nuclear family as an institution for creating this epidemic of shame-plagued men, and it's like it feels like it's switching tracks slightly to try and it feels like, I guess it's sort of thing, it feels like it's in the right position, even if it's not entirely connected to the dramatic arc that was happening at that moment. I think it feels like the right point in the episode to have a big speech that sort of cuts to the heart of Valerie and how awful she is, even if I don't necessarily agree that it entirely sort of gels with the rest of the show. That's not really talking about the speech itself so much. I think when it comes to the speech itself, I think as you say, like trying to sort of generalize the experiences of like all these people is maybe not that wise. I think, Tom, what you were saying about how Valerie maybe doesn't so much represent an individual as like an institution in society. I think it's possible to write something that's sort of both things at once, like, because even though obviously she's representing all these different families rather than just, you know, one example of a bad family, RTD is trying to sort of express the idea that so many of these families are bad. I think at the same time it's still in a way a form of it's sort of individual responsibility things, even if it is pointing the finger at a lot of separate individuals. The fact that I think it's just difficult to try and encapsulate it in this sort of like bad people, like people being bad. Because I think even within the speech, Jill says, I don't know what happened to make you so loveless. And I think that implicit in that is kind of an admittance that we're not really getting to the core of the issue here, but we're going to kind of move on like we are anyway. It's like, I'm not entirely sure, like, we get that Valerie's awful, and we really hate her for, you know, denying Ritchie a chance to die surrounded by people who love him or whatever. But I feel like stopping the buck there at Valerie's bad, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't necessarily... I don't feel like we get a massive amount from that in terms of our understanding of the story being told, or about, like, I don't know, or AIDS as a phenomenon or whatever, I don't know.
The speech makes more sense to me in context of Jill talking about the Tozer household, but the speech is pitched much higher than that. We know that not just from Russell T Davies saying, this is my personal theory of homophobia and so on. We know it because Jill is talking about, this is why I think those men in the AIDS wards think that this is a virus that they deserve on some level. Like, this is obviously a very ambitious speech that's trying to paint a really broad brush onto a lot of issues Jill is intimately familiar with.
Maybe the question is it villainizing? Is it, because there's that thing in episode 4 of like, don't look for a villain. In that context it was talking about who gave the infection of HIV or whatever, whereas in this context maybe the question of like, is putting the blame at sort of these loveless heterosexual marriages and families and stuff, is that another form of villainizing in its own way, in suggesting that the origin of the shame and sort of self-destructive behaviour in gay men kind of lies here or in a specific place rather than a more complicated phenomenon? I don't know.
Where it sits in the show, it's like the moral, you know, it's the big speech in the finale, so it's very difficult not to take this as the moral, even though of course we know that RTD isn't like trying to sell us, this is how you should all think of AIDS people, like that's absurd. But the dramatic structure in the show, it does kind of lend itself to us kind of wondering what we're wondering. Yeah. Tom, what's your thoughts?
I definitely hear you both about the idea that like it's the buck of that RTD is trying to pass of responsibility does maybe stop a little bit soon. But I would say that, like, for me at least, I sort of felt the series was going that little bit deeper into like the actual specific problems with family structures. Maybe not in an overt way, and maybe not in as an overt way as it should have done. But I felt like the idea that, you know, when we're born into this world, we're sort of immediately in debt to sort of our parents, and like the idea that, you constantly have to please your parents, and that your parents have some sort of dominion over you just because they gave birth to you. Which is like, it's the way Valerie, when she goes to hug Ritchie, she says like, "You're not infectious to me." It's like that weird sort of enclosing of genetics and like saying that our mother-son bond is the only bond that is real, and your other bonds and your desires are not real. And it's that way. And you could also say that like that sort of devotion to the parent figures is also like has a religious element to it as well. And then from there you could say that's why it's called It's a Sin, which is like just the whole, the idea that we have to run away from our desires because we're afraid of disappointing our parents or God or anyone, basically. I felt like the series was pretty good at articulating that. So in that sense, I don't feel like RTD is just like spraying all over the walls, whatever sticks. I feel like he was striking at something, basically.
I think he's very strong when it comes to psychology of people, and when it comes to domestic situations, and when it comes to that kind of thing. So I totally agree that the applicability as far as like inherited shame or inherited trauma and all these kinds of things in the family, I think he did that marvelously. I guess it's just with AIDS and things like it, because there's such huge issues that have affected so many people in such a myriad of ways. Whenever you try and do kind of like a big moral or principle thesis in a work of fiction about it, of course it's going to irritate some people. For some people will feel very seen by it. Some people will feel disgusted by how it's approaching things. And I mean, there's not really much we can bring to that conversation exactly, because I mean, we can talk about, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that, and then we're just treating whatever commentator or critics with AIDS like a monolith. And then I feel like that's a whole representational argument that we don't want to get into. All we can bring is our perspectives.
No, yeah, I'd agree with that. They're like,
so I think the essence of it is that the dramatic component, like as we see this toxic relationship between Valerie and Ritchie, I think that explores these ideas very, very well. And there's a difference between that and the perhaps more didactic side of something like the big the moral of the story speech like that. I think maybe there's a degree to which the drama stuff that we see through the actual explorations of character is like really good in itself, and it's still good even if we don't really like the didactic bits, or even if we do like the didactic bits. You see what I mean? Like the drama is good enough to hold up the show, I think.
More than anything else, the drama is so effective that it's going to get more people interested in the period and in the legacy of AIDS and in AIDS today. And so that's going to bring them to new perspectives other than Russell T Davies anyway. And so I guess any signal boosting of this in the first place is kind of going to reach a good end in that sense, whether it's to people that are agreeing with maybe his moralistic take on the shame factor, or whether it's people who aren't.
On the moralistic point, I would just say that like my own personal opinion is that the conceit of having Ritchie sort of own up to the fact that he may have done something harmful in having sex with people while he knew he had HIV, and then going on to sort of continue to be extremely sympathetic with Ritchie himself, that to me feels extremely anti-moralistic. Just at a very intrinsic level. But yeah, that's really all I have to say on that matter. That almost feels like the entire point of the plot. I feel like RTD sort of conceived of that as a rebuke of moralism in a way.
That's a very good point. It's that kind of humanization factor that runs through the whole thing. How can we take it as a kind of moral screed if the whole point is to humanize someone who RTD felt wasn't getting humanized in a lot of other stories about AIDS? It's probably worth roping in some of RTD's own motivation to make the show. He says,
I particularly hope a younger generation watches it. I mean, there are 18-year-olds in my family, in my friend's family, who kind of had no idea that this happened. There were deaths on a huge scale in Britain, and they have been brushed under the carpet a lot. And yeah, I think for a young generation to turn around and just to see what happened and respect those who fought the fought, and those fights are still going on. Everything the people in this fight for are still going on with trans rights, etc. So, it's like, if you want to arm yourself for battle, look at the battles that were fought before.
It's good to learn from this legacy, that really is there of the gay men and the lesbians and everyone else who was involved in the AIDS crisis in the United Kingdom, certainly in the 1980s.
See, I find myself slightly sceptical of sort of mission statements like, oh, well, you know, I'm educating the youth, I'm educating them about the fight, this is the story that went untold. I think when what you're doing is kind of a kind of, at times, kind of gloopy tearjerker drama that's kind of written in such ways to get people sort of sobbing and being like, oh, and maybe sort of swallowing some of the assumptions and stuff as well. I think you can never really tell the story because it's like, obviously, as we've said, it's a huge, complicated thing, and it's going this particular take of it on it is going to be prescribed by RTD's own interests and things that he knows and things and also his very unique take on stuff. Because I think RTD is perhaps captured by the poetic tragedy, perhaps the poet tragedy of the idea of dying from sex, because that hooks into some of RTD's recurring themes, maybe like this idea of hedonism and existential despair. I think the idea of a story about people who have sex and then that leads them to have to face death and immortality. It's like the ultimate RTD theme, isn't it? Such an RTD concept. And that in itself perhaps does not entirely capture maybe the complicated reality of like of living life with AIDS, people who have AIDS, and the idea of like sex with AIDS. Because obviously, one thing you can kind of bring up is that the whole idea of safe sex is like it's sort of brought up briefly in the early episodes, and then the whole concept of condoms vanishes. And you know, one thing that's when Ritchie talks about infecting other people, one thing that is not mentioned like in that context at all is like the idea of safe sex, for example, protection. It's like it's rather just the idea of like by choosing to have like a sex life for all is the implicit thing that Ritchie is sort of like was the super spreader in that sense. It's sort of there are implicit assumptions and sort of narratives that are kind of lumped in here, and I guess I think what RTD is doing is something that is in his interest to make a work of art that speaks to the heartstrings and speaks to his kind of poetic passions and stuff. And I think it's something that's there to sort of speak to the bit of your brain that's just sort of really feels and stuff. I think the last 5 minutes of this episode in particular, I think are kind of gloopy in a way. Like the music is like banging on full blast, and lots of scenes of everyone sobbing and flashback clips. Remember Colin? God, wasn't that sad? And here's a reminiscence of happier times when they were all alive and stuff. And I think it's this sort of like appealing very strongly to the emotions and stuff. Whereas I think when you try and say, "Oh, I'm actually achieving this great higher purpose of the battles that were fought," I think there's an element of maybe self-aggrandizement in there, which may be a bit of an unfair judgment. But
no, what you're saying really interests me. I think there's a couple of interesting conflicts there. I think to how RTD has said part of his drive for the show was that he wants young gay men to not be complacent. He wants to stress that HIV is not over, and so he wants kind of mechanical things like medicine to be more in people's minds that way. You know, he talks about how, you know, you can treat HIV to livable levels with medicine today, but at the same time, like you're saying, the show abandons condoms pretty early on, and then the show conflates sex and death so much. It's almost like Roscoe's father is writing the show in some way, sometime. Like, it puts this very kind of biblical judgment down on... We humanize Ritchie so much through his super spreading and everything, but at the same time, we're still getting this kind of inevitable connections between sex and death when it wasn't necessarily inevitable. And I guess that is presumably accurate to the period of, you know, how a lot of gay men in London were having sex at the time. But then, because the show is all stuck in the 80s and a tiny little early bit of the 90s, it does kind of abstract that out. So for all the show can form part of like a gay legacy for people watching today, it is kind of disconnected into gloopy drama at times. I think the 6th episode would have helped mitigate a lot of those factors, but we're not up to talking about that yet. We'll get to that later.
There was one interview with the actor who played Donald Bassett that I found very enlightening. I think the whole thing should have been like that instead of playing Stephen Fry, Russell T Davies guessing games. But anyway, that's my last word on the after show.
There's to that point Gig was talking about like the connections between drama and reality. I'm struck by there was an interview in which Russell said that...
So yeah, part of my job then is to create some people and to put them through this terrible experience. But as I say, it's my job. I don't want to push audiences away. It's my job to make you say, come here, come and love them. Please love these people. Please love these actors. And then when you feel the terrible things happening to them, that's actually really happened. And there's been an astonishing reaction to that. There's been an older generation remembering what happened. And I think there's been a bit of a silence about what happened. And a younger generation astonished to see this happening. Because although it's set in the 80s, which is ancient history to me, but it was very strange making a period drama set in the 80s. It's technically a period drama, but actually it's a very recognizable world. Apart from the cars, it's young people in bars having drinks in denim jackets. That's all very similar. So a young audience is seeing a very familiar world, very familiar, in which terrible things happen to young men in secret, men of all ages. And that's been quite a shock and an education and also part of the privilege of making the show.
Making audiences sad by killing characters was approximating how it felt to be a gay man in London in the 1980s, because, you know, your friends would be dropping dead. That's interesting.
I guess that's sort of collapsing reality into the idea of a TV drama structure. It is very interesting, but I guess what you I guess maybe the result that you come out with is, I think, at the end of the day, when we think about how the show makes us think about its gay characters and gay people in general, I guess it's almost like, this feels cruel, but like maybe they're a bit like objects of pity. Like we're very sad about the state that the poor gay people ended up in, and it's like in Ritchie's case, like, I mean, his death is off screen because it saved us that gut punch reveal that, he didn't even get to, he died alone, he didn't even get to be with his friends at the end. And I'm not dragging that whole plot element, because I love that the episode sets us up to think that maybe Valerie will have a character arc and grow and let Jill see Ritchie one last time, and maybe it'll be really Aristotelian and really, there'll be a character arc and it all makes sense, and she just doesn't, because she's that good, she's that bitter about Jill and other people having more of a relationship with her son than she has, and just the jealousy, because that's so great. But I think the way in which telling that story sort of places Ritchie, the person with AIDS, as kind of this locus for other people to feel miserable about, maybe sort of unprotagonisting him slightly in this story, is you could interpret the show in general as maybe making gay people a bit just kind of a bit helpless. I don't know. You could accuse it of just like, I don't know. I don't want to use this word, but woobifying them a little bit, making them these sort of like sad little helpless sort of cuddle bugs. I don't know.
On that topic of the show as a construction, there's this interesting quality with it where it's very much a testament. Russell T Davies has talked about how
always. I mean, you kind of do that whatever you're writing. If I'm writing Rose Tyler flying off in the TARDIS, I feel like me at 6 years old wanting to fly off in the TARDIS. But this is very crucially, I think, look around this table, all of us, I think we've all lost people, haven't we? I bet we've all lost someone to AIDS over the years, and those beautiful lives, those beautiful boys and women lost as well. It's so, to get a chance now, it's an honor. It's honestly an honor. It sounds pretentious when I say it, but I get the chance to write this series. And so I have put my life into it. I've put my friends into it. I think almost every line that's spoken in this drama, you could get a little tape measure and follow it back through time and find the friend that said it to me. All the dialogue is channeling and funneling those boys that I knew.
Such funny stories, such vivid people. That's been just a wonderful process of, it's like their voices are coming back to life.
I visited the Pink Palace. I didn't live in the Pink Palace. I didn't really start going out to my 30s. I always wanted to be a writer. So I saved my wage for years and years and not going out. It's partly why I'm writing this as well, to pretend my life was like that.
Yeah.
When he wrote Rose Tyler and Doctor Who flying off in the TARDIS, how that was like a fantasy factor for him. That was like wish fulfillment for him. So he always bases things on his own life, and that it's an honor to kind of project that wish fulfillment into the show, to put his friends into the show in that way. All of that's quite interesting.
I mean, you could say that outsider perspective that he kind of has, as someone who didn't really go out and participate in that life, but he's writing about people who did, and having that sort of, that conflict between the wish fulfillment element and the tragedy element of sort of lamenting this, great tragedy that occurs to other people. I guess, you could say the fact that RTD exists kind of at a remove from the story he's telling maybe gives it a bit of a I don't want to say, it's not that it lacks authenticity or anything, but that maybe that distance can be imperceptibly felt in some ways. I don't know, it maybe here and there. Do you know what I'm saying? Kind of a vague feeling?
Yeah, it's a really interesting quality, because I think sometimes it's really emotional and really effective how the show is like a tribute. I think to our discussion of episode 4 gig, where you learnt about how the Doctor Who segment, the Dalek segment, was actually this big beautiful tribute to a very real actor on a Doctor Who episode with Daleks in the 80s, who later died of AIDS, and how it was really beautiful how the show kind of crafted this tribute around him in that way. Of course, that you wouldn't get directly from the episode, but now you see, it was constructed around that. So I think it's really in the DNA of the show to be a testament to that. Certainly, no matter how much you might be exaggerating, when RTD says near every line is taken from something I actually heard, like, that's an incredible amount of, how else can you call it but authentic dialogue that's, coming from reality. But at the same time, it's still a completely constructed drama about these people that, besides Jill, didn't exist directly, that RTD is writing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff at play with the show as testament, the show as authentic, and the broader ideas of what RTD is trying to do with the show. We've discussed, like, trying to inspire people, trying to get them to learn the legacy, trying to arm them to fight battles today, and so on.
And obviously the real world context of that too is that I think when, for example, someone says, well, you need to watch the show to learn about history that's not being taught, and stuff, I think this isn't a problem with the show, but a problem with kind of the wider environment. The fact that people feel that there's kind of a lack of any, like, knowledge or storytelling about this whole stuff in the first place, it kind of puts more of an onus on RTD to say, like, well, this story is this, we're finally telling that story, we're educating the youth, we're doing this because no one else is doing it. So, like, any blind spots of RTD's take end up seeming like more of an issue, perhaps, because it's like there's no other counter examples to say, well, at least someone else is doing this, so here and there, because it's that paradox of being like the great gay writer of British television, and sort of it just implicitly condemning the fact that there's such a scarce field perhaps elsewhere.
It's like in an earlier Sin discussion when we were talking about that interview where RTD said, why he didn't include more about the lesbians of the time or other types of people that weren't his 5 main characters. And it's because, there's that balance between I'm writing what I know and I don't want to write for the other people, but also there's this institutional issue that people in a better stance to represent these other types of people aren't getting these jobs to do it in the first place. It's that monolith problem that, as one of the few really successful, really big gay writers in the UK, we can levy all these kinds of criticism at its sin because it's like the only show right now doing this. If this was like a superhero movie, we wouldn't be levying all these criticisms because we'd be like, oh, well, there's this other movie that does that, there's this other movie which does that. This one movie doesn't have to be everything. But while there's a huge and amazing great legacy of fiction about AIDS, movies about AIDS, plays about AIDS, TV about AIDS, it still pales in comparison to all sorts of other types of stories. And so certainly today, certainly this year. So yeah, it becomes easy to throw criticism at the show just because while we appreciate it so much, there isn't that much else out there doing what it's doing right now. At least that's just publicly available on HBO Max and Channel 4 and all that.
I think there's a Ryan Murphy show. That's the only other one I'm aware of. That's
Pose, right? Yeah, that's quite well reputed. That kind of deals with, like, I know there are, like, trans women in that show, and it kind of deals with the whole, like, ball culture and stuff. It seems very interesting. I've watched, like, an episode of it a while back.
It's an odd situation, isn't it, too, when it's like it's great to get these shows telling these stories that more mainstream television wouldn't be telling, but it's kind of paradoxical that then we're kind of more inclined to criticize it because why isn't it doing everything that content about AIDS should be doing? Do you know what I mean? It's like we'll criticize it more because there aren't other things doing that. It's just a sad way that, institutionally things get commissioned.
Okay, I'm really dying to hear about the 6th episode that you keep bringing up because, like, I'm really not clear on what the hell that's about.
It was, you start, it could be 8 episodes, it could be 6. You always go to a broadcaster with this. You ask for 8 because you get more money that way. You can spread the cost. So eventually Channel 4 said we only make 4 episodes because they got Deadwater Fell, all that stuff around that. Brilliant adult material. I love that channel. show. That was 4 episodes. There's just 4. And I started to write it, and I got through it all the way to episode 2. And I just went, this isn't going to work. And so me and Nicola had to go to Channel 4 and beg another episode. Because if you can imagine, the deaths would have gone like that. There wasn't room to breathe. It was just like death, like that. And that's, I said, you've got to have life passing at the same time. And they were lovely. Well, actually, they were completely lovely. This isn't quite true. There's a missing last episode. The whole point of the last episode that I'm kind of glad is missing now. I don't miss it now. I'm very pleased, delighted with the way it's fun. The final episode was always meant to be set in the present day. You'd start on video footage of Jill as she was, and it says you pull back, and there's modern day Jill in 2021, and it's good, this episode. And she's in Thailand. You're like, what's going on? And she's in Thailand on a police raid. Thailand is where there are villages full of computer servers full of information, where in these sexploitation cases, it's like what happens is in certain parts of the world, they are, this has been on the news, this is a well-known cases. Sexploitation cases are where young women are paid to and forced often to go online to attract men, to attract teenagers. In Britain and America, they basically talk to a young boy and get him to masturbate on camera and then blackmail him. And there have been suicides over this. The boys, poor, daft boys, bless them, to kill themselves. And so you find Jill, like in the modern day, still doing her best for men and boys, and she's stuck. It's like she's been stuck her whole life into this pattern. And then the story comes back to Britain, and she goes to the Isle of Wight. She's never been back to the Isle of Wight since, and she goes back to the Isle of Wight, still puzzled about what happened in that family, what made Valerie Tozer like she was, what made the father like she was. Bear in mind, that's why Ritchie's got a sister. The sister would be a grown woman by this stage, and would be 50. And like the secrets of the family, they're very clearly secrets in that family. Because this episode never existed, I've scaled the secrets down. It was a lot more overt that something was wrong in that household.
You can certainly still feel remnants of that there, though. I know Lydia West has talked about how she could feel it in the scripts, that there was something up with the parents. And we talked earlier about how it kind of feels like Valerie may have had a history of trauma or something with how she characterizes men.
If you read the script, Valerie, you'd be like, oh my God, what a monster this woman is. Mm-hmm. But Keely, the way she played it, you kind of sense there's some things kind of happened to her. I feel like she had some trauma, that maybe her generation in that time, they never really spoke about it. She never really brought it into the open. She just kind of lived with it. What's so good is like, Russell knows these characters so well, and I mean, it's all there in the script, right? But maybe people might not necessarily have picked up on the fact that their marriage really was there was something that was really wrong. But there's so much hidden in there that I think Russell puts in there, for people to really kind of come to at some point. So
the shame trickles through to Ritchie, and I think that's what is amazing about Russell and Russell's writing, that he can do that, and he writes that into characters. They're humans, they have lived.
On the subject of Valerie's sort of attitude towards men, there is a line where she explicitly says that her father was a bad man. So I guess that pretty much makes it, explicit.
Yeah. So, and Ollie Alexander said how scripts are loaded with hidden details of characters in this way. So there was all this stuff about the Tozer household that maybe didn't come to a direct head like it would have in this 6th episode.
So she would go back and investigate all this. So the whole point that actually she kind of set herself free all the way through that episode. There'd be a friend of hers asking her out on a date. Come on a date. She still hasn't married anyone. She hasn't found a life of her own. And at the very end, she's asked out on a date. It's all set free. And she says, yes, okay, I'll do that. And that's why it's on water. Sails out to sea is kind of epic. So that's missing. And I'm kind of sad that's missing. But equally, I think the drama works very well. Unfortunately, Jill's story would have been in that final 6th episode revealed.
Yes.
Although not revealing any particularly extra complexity to her. She goes on a mission for the truth. And I think sometimes that's the kind of deep breath you have to take and say, this is a very straightforward character. She's not carrying any I love people sort of saying, this woman does another agency. And that's the story. And it's Mrs. Tozer who turns around, Valerie Tozer, who turns around to her in the end and says, never mind his boyfriend, where the hell is yours? That's what it's about. That's the story. I love people pointing out the story as a problem.
Yes.
It sounds kind of random, to be honest. I don't know, it just feels like a weird diversion.
My immediate takeaway is that Jill, having had years and years, no pun intended, to reflect on what happened with Ritchie and Valerie, would make more sense for her to then deliver that speech. Whereas, you know, as it is, it's like, as Gig pointed out, it's maybe she should have been more concerned about the direct impact of like her friend has died.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think it would have maybe lended more credence to her behavior. And I think like more Jill characterization might not have hurt in general. But I mean, I'm quite happy with like the 5-episode concise nature of this show. But I mean, who can say whether it would have been great or extraneous? But yeah.
The funny thing when we talk about the 5th episode, the 6th episode, the 4-episode version of the show, 8-episode version of the show, when Russell was writing the series with the initial 4-episode order and realizing this wasn't going to work because it would engulf it in depth too much, he went to Channel 4 to beg for a 5th episode, and he pitched it as this Thailand episode.
When I went to Channel 4 to beg an extra episode, to beg a 5th episode, I told them that was the 5th episode.
Oh.
So they were expecting that. And then the material in 1980s just kept on spreading. So eventually I handed in the 5th episode, which didn't have any of that in it. And I never quite knew. That's why Nicola Schindler's a very good producer. She never told me what conversations were had, because I think people were sitting there going, you told us. It's a completely different story. And about 6 months later, I said to Nicola, was there any fuss about that? She went, don't worry about that.
Also on the idea of Jill's interior life and dating, in the behind the scenes video for the finale, as we got it, there was talk about how Jill had a cut scene with she may have had some kind of relationship with one of the colleagues.
And I didn't see Jill hook up once.
I know!
And
she almost did.
Almost did.
Did it get cut out?
Yeah, we did have some scenes with a colleague at the French Revolution that Jill was kind of into, but nothing happened between them.
Jill needs more cred from the crew.
Didn't sound like eventuated to anything. Was that your read on how Lydia talked about it, Tom?
It wasn't exactly clear, but yeah, I didn't get the sense that like it would have been a continuing part of the show. No.
I like the idea of a finale in the modern day, and that I feel like there'd be a real power and weight to bringing the show to the modern day. I feel like it would deal with some of the stuff we've been talking about, like the abstraction of having the show set in the 80s, bringing some of the lessons and realities of the show to the modern day. But at the same time, it's interesting that it would have dealt with a concept that RTD, as far back as 2015, has been thinking of doing an entire television show around. There's quotes from articles in 2015 saying that after The Boys, after It's a Sin, as it came to be known, that he plans to investigate the computer hackers who film people performing sex acts without their knowledge, then blackmail them. One case about a Scottish teenager who killed himself after an attack has particularly affected Davies, who plans to incorporate the tragic story into the as-yet untitled series. And also that Davies has also revealed that he's been talking to long-time producer Nicola Schindler, who did Queer as Folk and Cucumber and It's a Sin with RTD, talking to her about a drama about sexploitation gangs in the Philippines and Morocco and online sexual blackmail of young boys. It sounds like really intense stuff, and it sounds like we will get his take on this, just not in It's a Sin.
I agree an episode in the present would have been like a cool concept. I do feel that whole pitch, it just seems like such a... It feels divorced from the centre of what the show was actually doing. To have a whole episode about Jill and her kind of not really dealing so much with kind of gay people or kind of the queer community, and Jill sort of... It feels like it's getting off track to have an whole episode about like a different like reason that boys are killing themselves or whatever, and then to go back to like the problems with Valerie and Clive in their house as well. It feels like we're continuing to get even further off from like the people with AIDS as kind of being at the centre of the story. It feels a bit weird. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and people drawing a connection between the themes of this show and the AIDS crisis, and then later on to the sexploitation angle. Like, people like us will do that anyway, so it's not really necessary for it to be an episode of It's a Sin.
I feel like it wouldn't just be like the 5 episodes as we got them and then a 6th episode on top of that. Like Russell talked about how he would tie in more of this Tozer troubles in the household, more of their family legacy would be spread throughout the whole show, so that there was a dramatic culmination in us finding out what the deal was there in this 6th episode. But yeah, certainly in the series as we got it, in the 5 episodes as we got it, I don't feel like this Thailand and Isle of Wight story was necessary, and I feel like cannibalizing the big Valerie-Jill confrontation there into the 5th episode basically worked, although it might have made more sense, like we said, taking place decades later.
See, even what you described there, with there being more of a mystery over what was really going on with the Tozers, what was the dark secret they had. I feel like that's kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier about making it reduces what Tip was praising earlier, which is the idea that the Tozers can represent all families of that kind. And I think delving too far into the specific secrets and the history that happened there is like, it's making it too much about this bad family, you know? So I feel like putting even more emphasis on that would kind of, I don't think it would help the show that much.
I think Russell is clearly really passionate about these sexploitation gangs, and I have no doubt that he could channel this really well into a television show of its own. But with It's a Sin and how it's all focused around AIDS, if the modern day 6th episode had been Jill dealing with some modern issue with AIDS, some modern case of AIDS, people not getting the treatment they need or something like that, some modern issue that would make sense for her to get herself involved in with AIDS, I feel like that would track so much more cleanly with this series. It's that it would be a separate issue that would make sense for her to deal with, given how she's a very protective and nurturing people and tries to help boys and things like that. This 6th episode of the sexploitation gangs sounds like it would make sense character-wise, but the show had been so kind of focused concept-wise with AIDS that, yeah, I don't think it would have been the cleanest 6th episode, the cleanest finale to do, even though I think bringing the show into the modern day would have been really ambitious and I think really good. I think it's a really fascinating idea that could have worked out really well, but maybe not in this specific envisioning.
It has thematic unity in its current form as well. Like this final episode centering around the whole sort of reality being sort of bending around Valerie and her denial, basically. That links all the way back to the start with the denial of HIV and denial of oneself. It's neat in its current form. And I think this additional excursion to Thailand sounds a bit... it sounds sprawling, perhaps, rather than neat.
I think when we talk about Russell T Davies' thesis on issues related to gay men, whether it's gay shame in Cucumber or the AIDS epidemic in It's a Sin, in terms of like big thesis statements, it kind of works better, I think, to read these across his shows, to look at Queer as Folk and to look at Cucumber and Banana, It's a Sin, Bob and Rose, this sexploitation show, if it centers around gay men as it eventually gets made, rather than to all pack multiple things into the one show, can get a bit unwieldy. Yeah, so I appreciate the focus of It's a Sin.
RTD has gotten a lot of flack for the way he portrays mothers. I guess I'm talking mostly about Doctor Who in this. You know, Jackie Tyler, Martha's mum, Donna's mum, Sylvia. And I guess, like, something that impressed me about Valerie is that she is kind of RTD's most immoral mother he's ever created. But how do I want to say this? I think RTD portrays Valerie in a way that sort of... In the same way that, like, toxic masculinity is damaging to men, I think the whole idea of, like, the housewife and the angel of the house is very damaging to women, you know? And in the media, we mostly see this through the archetype of, like, the pill-popping housewife, which I'm sure we've all encountered in various things, where it's like these women feel like they can't live up to this ridiculous ideal that, like, society has created for mothers and wives. But I think there's like also another perhaps very closely related danger where, like, some people like Valerie can take this ideal of the angel of the household and really take it as writ and really take it into their heads that it's actually true, and then, like, they sort of buy into this myth themselves, and they sort of feel like by that logic that everything they do is sort of justifiable and perhaps like morally good.
See, I think what was interesting about what you just said there is that you were brought up how she compares to the other RTD mothers, and I think the real thing is that whereas the Doctor Who mothers that kind of get flack for being maybe kind of broad portrayals and maybe slightly caricature-like, you know, Jackie's always the butt of the joke, you know, Sylvia's there to annoy Donna, basically. Whereas with Valerie, even though she is probably the darkest and the most horrible because of what she does, she's the most realistic, isn't she? Like, she's not just an annoying mother, she's not just a mother who's there to be an annoying mother. She is an actual interesting critique of like what a toxic mother actually is. And that makes her so much more interesting. I feel it really puts her a cut above this idea of, RTD writes annoying mothers. This is actually him almost facing up to that and challenging it, to actually sort of face that critique and stare that critique in the face and do it properly, I guess.
Yeah, and I like Jackie Tyler for similar reasons. Like, I feel like she has some pretty realistic flaws, just like on the scale of what Doctor Who characters are usually like. I think Jackie Tyler's a pretty good character, but like I'm sort of cautious about this point because I know that mothers historically have been so like scapegoated for all social problems, basically. And you have to acknowledge that like, because of the role that like society puts them in, they have to do so much domestic labor and physical labor and emotional labor. But I think Valerie is just a really good articulation of basically how that archetype sort of can damage women psychologically.
It's interesting how we talked about in earlier discussions the obvious parallels between COVID-19 and AIDS since the show has come out in 2021. To that point, when we think about the genesis of the show, I think it's interesting to note, I'll quote Russell T Davies here directly, "I don't want to give a false impression that I'm allowed to make any artistic statement whenever I want. This series was written in 2015 and sat on people's desks for a long time. It wasn't an instant commission. It's a tough sell. People die. I think a lot of commissioners felt like we'd seen the story before. They haven't, but they felt like they have, because there's kind of a rolling weight of different HIV stories behind us now." Another interesting note on the writing of the show is Russell T Davies, well, we say he's a fast writer. He's a very fast writer, but not to deadlines, shall we say.
He's fast when he's actually writing.
He's fast when he gets to writing. He's not fast to getting to writing, yes.
I'm quite a fast writer, and I tend to sit here and bash things out. And that first episode had to be dragged out to me over about 6 months. I normally take about 2 weeks. It took 6 months to. There were blocks. I had blocks. I sat here crying and thinking about those people. And also then I had to rebuild it. I thought, I don't want to make a series in which everyone cries. I don't want to drive viewers away. I want to make this as fun and as lively and as entertaining as those boys' lives were. So yeah, I kind of had to deconstruct myself and then build myself back up.
And so he's surprised the show is so successful because he thought people watching a drama about AIDS was a very hard sell since he had trouble selling it.
The success of this program, can you believe it?
No, to be honest, absolutely not. I think I probably spoke about it when I was last on, and it felt like, it felt like we were making a good show and with lovely people. But can you imagine a situation? I was going to bed in this house at Christmas thinking, how the hell do you sell a drama about AIDS? Who wants to watch that in the middle of a pandemic? Just because it's such a serious subject matter. So honestly, I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And this has been the greatest joy of my career, actually. And I've done Doctor Who, I've done Queer as Folk, but this is kind of more important in a way.
It's interesting to ask that question of he was worried about it not being popular, but obviously it's been a massive success. People have really latched onto this, hugely. I think people seem really primed for this take on AIDS and kind of gay history, and they're really sobbing their eyes out over it. They love the characters. So I guess it's like, what is RTD doing right to kind of make it take off so well? And I guess it's a mixture of that. He very much does get in that idea of lovable characters, that sense of joy that people were feeling back then, and putting that into a show. And also of course there's the element that people love a sob story as well. People want to cry at things. People are totally open to watching stuff that will make them, that will wreck them emotionally. So that's not that much of a hard sell either, I think.
I'm really fascinated this aspect of the show ended up successful. So the show, we've been discussing it weekly because it's been broadcast on Channel 4 weekly from January 2021 to February 2021 now. But all the episodes also launched online at the same time the first episode broadcast on Channel 4. So for all these weeks that the show's been airing, there's been plenty of people who watched the entire show at the start. I mean, me and Tom did this. That's why we had those spoiler zone discussions through the first 4 episodes to discuss episodes in context of the spoilers we'd already seen. I'm amazed, and RTD seems amazed as well, that this all worked out so well, putting the whole show up online, because the results of that have been really, really good in terms of the rating. The ratings are higher than they seem when that online data is taken in. So Russell T Davies, although he was apprehensive about it at first, he doesn't complain about the way they structured it.
I've been doing this for 57 years now, and I'm wary of putting it all out online. I'm an old-fashioned viewer like that. I watch things weekly when I can, but actually I also find myself shifting. And I have to say, I was worried about all of this being dropped online. I was very worried about it, and I thought it could kill it. And I have to say, the results have been splendid.
Really?
And I'm bumping into people here.
How do you work out the viewership, Russell? How do you get the?
How
do you know?
There are computer people there working out. It's like, like if you went on the ordinary ratings, Sherry, it's like our first night ratings from like 1.9 million. That's fine. That's nice. That's not bad for Channel 4.
Yeah.
The computer people do their clickety-click things. They go, no, you're having 6.5 million.
I know. I saw.
So,
wow.
And I only just discovered this morning that doesn't include people who've watched on Sky or Virgin.
Wow.
I know. So that was announced to us today. So I'm not going, oh my God, it's astronomical. So you see what I mean? I can't exactly complain.
Does that surprise you guys? It's an interesting way to release a show, certainly.
See, what I wonder is who's watching the weekly TV airings. I mean, you could accuse me of doing it since I was sort of watching one episode a week and sort of spacing it out, but that was just for my own volition. I wasn't actually watching it on TV at the time. So, like, I kind of wonder, like, obviously the whole binge model has been a huge success for other shows, and you can easily see why it works for this show. It's the sort of thing that you can devour. You know, it's a fairly contained little narrative. It goes from start to end. It doesn't hinge on suspense of what will happen in next week or anything like that. So it totally works for the show. But I do wonder, like, how does that affect these TV airings, like this slot that it has, this airing slot? Like, what role does that serve? I do wonder. Like, so maybe it's for people who don't use the internet. Maybe, I don't know.
It beats me. I'm just very interested that it ended up so successful. Especially because the Americans, so on HBO Max, this all launched together, all at once. So it's interesting that the British got that kind of weekly option, and the Americans are getting it much more directly as like a streaming show with all the episodes packaged together. Just interesting, this new world of television. Russell T Davies has played with format a lot. His last big gay drama, Cucumber, Banana and Tofu, were 3 intertwined shows that released weekly, one episode of each across the week. So 24 episodes of this show all up across 8 weeks. That was a really interesting play with the format. And then we have this hybrid all at once and also weekly show. Yeah, so I look forward to however his next show comes out. It's interesting to see him play with this kind of thing.
I did enjoy sort of forcing myself to rewatch an episode every week. I pretty much binged it all in one go then. I rewatched them weekly. And I found that a really fulfilling experience. Sort of having the foresight of like how it's going to go, but also sort of feeling the intermissions between the years. I might sort of impose that on myself for future shows that I watch maybe, but yeah, I very much enjoyed the release model.
Yeah, I agree. It's great to rewatch something with that kind of context. It helps you appreciate everything that went into it when you're not just kind of getting smothered in the really visceral effect of a show like this, the craft of it. Yeah, I had that same experience of enjoying rewatching them week to week. So this show, It's a Sin, certainly isn't Russell T Davies' only big television show really about the gay experience. He's done Queer as Folk in the 1990s, Cucumber, Banana and Tofu earlier in the 2010s. Bob and Rose kind of dealt with some related themes. But I thought overall this show was a big success. This worked very well for me. I think the character work was exceptional. I appreciated seeing his insight into this period of history. And yeah, it was a blast. It was really good. What did you guys think overall?
I thought overall it was, again, another evidence of RTD refining himself as a writer, kind of paring things down, and a really nice self-contained unit, whereas something like Cucumber Banana was this kind of sprawling project which maybe had some bits and pieces here and there. Like, I think it's nice to have It's a Sin as this unit where it's all very contained and it has all these neat themes from start to finish, and it's a satisfying work, and I think it's a good important step for him as a writer, and we're glad to have it. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I thought it was deeply moving. Probably one of the best miniseries I've seen in a while. I have not seen every Russell T Davies show, so I cannot call it his best. It's probably my favourite work of his that I've seen. I'm very much looking forward to watching Cucumber and Bob and Rose. But yeah, this is his most polished work I'm seeing. And I'm also really glad that it brought me to some other really good dramas about the AIDS crisis, Normal Heart, Angels in America. I really enjoyed both of those. And they're also both, along with It's and Sin, 3 totally different works in tone and approach and to some extent in message. And I look forward to continuing sort of doing a deep dive into the dramas centered around that time, you know, as well as learning more about the actual facts and histories and historical accounts. I think this show is a good thing to exist in the world. And I'm very thankful for RTD for doing it.
Indeed. And I have to say that a huge part of the joy and merit of the experience of doing these discussions for each episode of It's a Sin has been the feedback, particularly the comments on the YouTube videos, where people have been opening up and sharing their thoughts and perspectives and also their experiences. It's been really humbling to read the actual lived experience of some people who were there at the time. We really appreciate any and all comments. It's a real delight to read them, and I personally feel very lucky to get the chance to reply and engage in conversations back and forth with some of those people chiming in. So we're very happy to kind of hopefully reflect a microcosm of one of the strengths of It's a Sin, in that sense of conversations being had, thoughts being shared, openness being encouraged. And yeah, we're hugely appreciative of any and everyone that's listened to our discussions like this one and hopefully enjoyed them. And we definitely have more discussions and coverage coming on Russell T Davies' shows, both whatever he has in his future and all the shows of his past. Gig and I are both big fans of his sprawling 2015 epic gay drama Cucumber, which we've mentioned a few times in these discussions. And there's so much to talk about regarding that show, that triptych of shows really. And A Very English Scandal and Bob and Rose have been brought up in the comment sections as well. And Russell T Davies has a wide range of shows, not as directly focused on the gay experience, but still very interesting in their own ways as well. So there'll be discussions and coverage coming down the line on shows like that, and of course on all sorts of non-Russell T Davies content as well. So once again, thank you very much for listening and to those commenting, and we hope some of you might enjoy future discussions we'll have to share as well. Thank you.